As he said, I'm Steve Goodgame, K5ATA, and I'm the Education and Learning Manager at ARRL. Technically, my job kind of encompasses everything to do with education and learning, but as Hayden said, my true passion is getting youth more involved. I taught school in a public school here in the States for 21 years, and now I run this. So I did teach ham radio through the years in my classroom, and I learned a lot of lessons doing that. So first things first, and this is kind of paramount for everything that I talk about and preach, is that the first thing we have to do is believe that kids can do hard things. As soon as we start thinking that kids aren't capable of doing difficult things, which a lot of us tend to think that way now because they're used to everything being on their phone and everything, things get a lot more difficult to engage kids. As soon as we kind of take hold of the fact that kids can do hard things, we're in good shape. But first, a little survey, and I'll be honest with you, y'all, your video for me is a little bit small. So if Hayden or somebody can kind of tell me about how many hands go up. It's a quick little survey. So raise your hand if you love amateur radio. Okay, I do see a few hands up there. If you were introduced to amateur radio at and I put it in quotes, young age, because young in a room full of hams is different than young most other places. If you've ever gone to a school to encourage them to include amateur radio, so you've actually gone and spoken to a principal, or what do you call them in Australia, headmasters or something, maybe, I don't know. You've actively worked to engage youth in amateur radio, so maybe not going to a school, but you're active in trying to get more kids involved. And this one, everybody should be able to answer. Raise your hand if you were ever a kid, because nobody wants to feel left out. I have a few of these things called TPSs that comes from my teaching days. I took most of them out because I'm not there to actually interact with you. That stands for Think, Pair, Share. And so just really quickly, turn to your partner or something, or somebody nearby, and name something you remember seeing or doing for the first time as a kid. Doesn't have to be amateur radio related at all, but that first thing that you can remember going, wow, that's cool, or it kind of stuck in your head as something that you wanted to learn more about. I know for me it was, that people could actually go to the moon. And just kind of tell your neighbor, and then a couple of y'all, if you could shout it out. And Hayden, do you have a runner for a microphone? Or if not, you can kind of pass along what they said. Just if a couple people don't mind sharing what that answer is.
Yeah, we have some mics in the room if you want, Steve.
Okay, if somebody feels so bold as to shout out, what's that first thing you remember thinking, wow, that's cool?
Mary, that's cool.
Hold on, we need that one repeated, I think. There's some mics coming.
Mary, that's cool.
What was that he said?
Hang on, go again.
This absolutely cool chick called Mary at school.
Ah, well, yeah, that can be cool a lot of times, but who else?
Hold on, the mic's coming. The mic's coming.
Oh, I think I got the gist of what he said too. So I have a feeling Australia sounds a little more fun in grade school than the States. So all right. So y'all's cool thing was apparently a bunch of people named Mary. But that's okay. That amateur radio is one of the things that I want kids when they're in school, or just not necessarily in school, but just in the general public. I want them to, the first time they see it, I want that to be that thing for them, that thing that they go, wow, that's really cool. I just spent the last 3 days at a teacher conference here in the States trying to tell teachers about our Teachers Institute. And that's kind of most of the teachers had never heard of amateur radio either. And so that was my goal with them as well, is to make them go, holy cow, that's really cool. We actually threw together a quick little demonstration on satellites and went out to the parking lot. I had to apologize later because apparently that's not allowed right underneath the airport or something. I don't know. But and did a little demo and worked some satellites out there. So, we wanted those people to think, wow, that's cool. I had 4 jobs when I moved. I took this. Moved from Mississippi up here to Connecticut. And I now have one job where I work more hours than I did for all four of those other jobs. But there's a difference, and I'm kind of big on quotes. And Simon Sinek says, working hard for something you don't care about is called stress, but working hard for something that we love is called a passion. And that's what this is for me. It's a passion. I do what I do for the kids. I don't do it necessarily to benefit you or I. I don't do it to benefit my boss. I do it because I've seen firsthand what amateur radio offers youth. And that's my why. So as you go through this, just kind of stop and think, and what is your why? Why is it, for those of you who do spend time reaching out to youth, or whatever it is that you enjoy about amateur radio, what is your why? So getting back to that, youth can do hard things. Youth like to feel successful when they accomplish difficult things. They get that feeling. That changes depending on the youth. So what's hard for one isn't necessarily hard for another, and that's perfectly okay. So like in a classroom or in a club setting, if you have kids come out for field day, have projects of various levels so that each one can get that sense of accomplishment. And they like having recognition for accomplishing those things. So I'm not sure if you're going to be able to hear the sound on my PowerPoint or not when I click this next one. But if you see those two gentlemen looking kind of crazy up in the top, they actually, one of the first projects they did completely on their own was they built from a kit these little Elenco FM receivers. And if you know kids nowadays, they don't really listen to FM radio anymore. They stream everything off of their phone. And so that when they've put the battery in and turn the knob, they were more than a little excited it actually worked. And I don't know if the sound's going through there or not, but yeah, I think you get the idea of what was going on here. And then I let them wander the school with that radio turned all the way up, making enough noise that it annoyed every other teacher, but mostly because I wanted the other kids in other classrooms to stick their heads out and ask, what all the racket was, what was going on, so they could say, hey, I built these in Mr. G's class, and then they'd find out why. Youth also want a sense of belonging. One thing we know about kids is they want to belong to something. Kids join all kinds of activities, and I assume it's the same in Australia as it is here in the States. A lot of times they bounce from one activity to another, although I've known Hayden for quite a while now, and he does different sports than the norm up here. He talks about playing cricket and things like that up here I have to look up the rules when he makes these references, but he's culturing me. They like to bounce around from activity to activity, trying to find a group. When they find their crew and engage, that's when their growth really takes off. So the first thing you want to do is create a space for them. They have to have a place where they can show up and, feel comfortable nerding out and not worrying about other people judging them. So show them how to use it, and then let kids own it. So the space in the school or the space in the club or wherever it is, if you have a space for youth, make it their space, not your space that they're borrowing. It's kind of the same thing with radios and kids at home. My daughter is an extra class amateur radio operator as well. And when she upgraded, one of the first things she wanted was her own HF rig, because by golly, she didn't want to keep borrowing daddy's. She wanted her own so that it was set exactly the way she wanted it, and so she could own it. Teach them to be responsible for it, and they'll take pride in it. Make sure there are several areas of the space, this is talking about in the schools, for different aspects of amateur radio. And these are all pictures from my old classroom. And, I had a station where they could operate. And then I had a station where they could, do some little projects. I also had a station that constantly had ladder line laid out, and they were building in mass the roll-up J-pole antennas because we lived out in the sticks. And, I gave every kid that got a license, I supported most of it through my YouTube channel. And Hayden did a lot for that channel as well. So I'll give Hayden a little attaboy for that. He sent plenty of gear for my kids. I called them my Padawans. But when they got that, they weren't able to hit the repeater from home. So we created the antennas, or they built them antennas, so that they could get into the repeater from their house and keep those things going. I did learn a few lessons as we went through, but a quick little question for you, and we can do this by show of hands. Should we actively pursue licensing with youth? So should we encourage the kids to get licensed, or should we just expose them to wireless technology and, hope, kind of plant the seeds for the future? I found over the last year of doing these sorts of things that there's kind of a dividing line between the two. So raise your hand if you're one of those people that says, yes, we should pursue getting these kids licensed while we've got them. And I land soundly in that camp myself. And just so I can kind of see on my small picture there, who are the people that say, maybe not so much, or, plant the seeds and let them build it. So I learned some lessons. This is in 2006, and this is actually the first group of kids I had the privilege of teaching amateur radio to. And in 2006, I lived in Duncanville, Texas, and, I had these kids get licensed. I won a couple of grants to build a station, and so built a station. And then near the end of the year, we found out that we were going to end up moving away from these kids to Mississippi. And by doing that, these kids didn't have anybody to engage them after I left. I thought I had it set up. The secretary of the school, her husband was a ham. And there was, at the time, there was some nice gear there for him, and it was already set up. And so I got with him, and he said, oh, yeah, absolutely. I'll come in and keep the club going, keep these kids going. That didn't happen. I'm not sure why. I have my suspicions. But the gear, for some reason, after a few months of the next school year, wasn't at the school anymore. And so what do you think happened? Now, I don't know what your licensing term, how long your license is good for in Australia when you get a license. Here, they're good for 10 years. You get a license, they're good for 10 years. So I left, and what do you think happened to all of those kids' licenses after 10 years? Every one of them expired. They lapsed. They nobody engaged them. And so they never got the rest of the way engaged in the hobby. And so we lost, really, it's three hams here. The tallest of the gentleman on the far right, he didn't quite make the cut, but he wanted to be in the picture anyway. What you can't see, because that picture is so old, is his eyes were beet red from the tears. But so just getting him licensed is not enough. And that story time I just kind of told you. So you have to engage kids after they test. So youth outreach is kind of like fishing. Sometimes the fish runs with the hook. You get a kid licensed, a skilled fisherman can reel it in. But that hook has to be set. And that's why I fall firmly in the camp of get a kid licensed when you've got them. In school, I had a relatively captive audience. And so I wanted all of those kids to go ahead and get that license while they had it. My thinking on that was, like I said, they hop around from hobby to hobby all the time. And you have to be okay with that. When mom signs them up for soccer or cricket or whatever it is that they play down there, there's going to come a point when they want to come back and circle back around. And if they already have their license, they already have the tools they need to be able to come right back in and feel like they belong again. They don't feel like they have to start over from scratch. So this is a picture of several of my kids. This is the last year. This is the last year before I moved away from Mississippi. And that's kind of the question. I left my club there in the hands of another ham. The story sounds like the one from 2006. And I'm hoping that he keeps them engaged. I'm not sure how that's going right now. I've talked to him a few times, and it's always along the lines of, well, I'm working on it. But somebody has to be there to keep the youth engaged in the hobby. You have to get used to the fact that they're teenagers or preteens or whatever they are. So yeah, they're going to be annoying little twits every now and then. And you just have to be okay with that and roll with it, because the other option is we can act like a bunch of old curmudgeons and run them off. And then we've lost, 10 or 15, however many kids are in this picture here. So time to brainstorm. And these are a couple more pictures from my classroom. And you can see I had kids in my after school club ranging from 6th grade all the way up to about 9th or 10th grade for most of it. And then the last couple of years, I had a couple 11th and 12th graders in there as well. So these are the ones that I typically think can reach out and help with these kids, youth clubs, local clubs, field day schools, scouts. And then we'll have a period for questions and answers at the end. So if you have any other ideas for, ways to keep kids engaged, I'd love to hear them, as would I'm sure everybody else who's there with you. In your clubs, welcome youth to your club. Now, this picture on the bottom right, you can see I had a bunch of my Padawans come to the local club meeting. And, I think there are 10 or 15 of them. You can't see all of them in that picture, obviously. But here in the United States, and like I said, I'm not sure if you have the Thanksgiving holidays or something similar. Obviously, you don't have Thanksgiving. We have our Thanksgiving holidays, and a lot of times it's a tradition. You go to family, and they have, the old people's table, and then the kiddie table. The kids all eat in another room or at the kiddie table, and that, unfortunately, that's what happened at this meeting. The average age on the far side of the room there is probably 72. The average age on this side of the room is more like 14. And what ended up happening is, as the kids were coming in, they were kind of shuffled over to this side of the room. And you can see where a couple of the older folks even squeezed into places so they didn't have to sit next to one of the kids. Okay. And every one of these kids, except for one, ended up not coming back to the club because of the way that, they were pretty much disowned the whole time. Though on the top right, this gentleman, the gentleman in the gray shirt, is actually teaching the then club president about Echolink and trying to get him to understand that, Echolink is a viable option for some of the kids or hams that live far out. And fortunately, this gentleman who was the club leader then was a very forward-thinking guy. He kind of took this guy under his wing a little bit, and then he actually hosts an Echolink node now so that kids can use it, and everybody else, obviously. And then that kid also went on, and he's upgraded all the way to an extra class ham, and he does presentations at Hamfest. In fact, he went to Dayton Hamvention last year and did a presentation there. So that's him in that middle picture doing that presentation. So, if you take the time to engage him and make him feel welcome, they're going to run with it. This kid's traveling the country now doing ham radio presentations on APRS and stuff like that. So, so different activities that can engage youth. For those kids who like to be outside, things like POTA and SOTA, camping. Camping is a big one here with the Scouts. And that's kind of one of the ways I'm going with them, trying to work with the Scouts more. For the builder and maker, we have things like Makeys, Snap Circuits, and I have a picture of those for those of you who don't know what those are. Different kits and antennas. I didn't really expect the kids to enjoy building those ladder line J-poles as much as they did. I think I actually left about 50 ladder line J-poles in the closet when I left. They just kept building them. And then for your computer kind of geeky people like us, the digital modes, all of them, whether you like them or not, it's okay. FTA is not really going to kill ham radio. Integrating things with computers. WinLink, yeah, believe it or not, kids do like WinLink. Tell them to put their phone in airplane mode in the middle of a football field and send an email. And when they can't do it, but you can do it with your radio, it actually does still impress kids. Online communities such as Discord, that's where the kids are. So sometimes that's where we have to go to help engage kids. And then hacking radios, and I'll talk to you a little bit about that here in a second. So building circuits, the one on the bottom is the one that most of us probably remember something similar to growing up. With the old wires and the springs, we could build different circuits that did the same things. And then the other two pictures are essentially the same thing with parts that are harder for kids to swallow. They do everything that the old ones did. They're just on these big plastic things that literally snap onto pieces, and it's a little easier to keep up with parts, and moms don't necessarily scream as loud when they vacuum them up and stuff like that. But they accomplish the same task, and these things come in sets like, well, the one on the right, you can see you can build 300 projects, and that's just the ones that they give you the plans for. The kids are going to start exploring and experimenting and building all kinds of just crazy junk. Hacking radios. Yeah, it's actually a thing. This guy up on the top right, He's got a YouTube channel. If you don't follow him, is temporarily offline. KM9G, and he actually hacked. And I say hacked, but because he did one of these. I don't know if you can see my screen or not, but that's an X6100. He hacked because it's basically just running Linux back there. And then he installed WSJTX on it. In the bottom picture, you see it's actually running WSJTX on the radio itself. Once kids start to see things like some of these SDRs are just a computer back behind it and they can customize things and tweak things, a lot of them, that's where they're going to take off. There are a huge number of kids who enjoy doing that kind of stuff. And a lot of them think they're hackers when, you leave your phone unlocked and they get into it. But a lot of them actually truly like to get in there and fiddle around with what's behind the screens there. Beginning circuits. This is a makey. If you have one thing that you want to give a classroom teacher to teach basic circuits to kids, this is it, because it just plugs into your computer and you can build simple circuits. The picture in the middle is actually like a piano, but it's played by hitting the bananas. The one on the right there, that's actually a picture of one of my kids that was playing, made a game controller out of the graphite and a pencil because it's conductive, connecting all the things to it. He was playing Pac-Man using a sheet of paper for his game controller. Just stuff like that. They can create all kinds of interesting, fun circuits that they think is just crazy. It's like, I get to play a piano with a banana, and kids actually like that stuff. So it's all about elmering. And elmer, and I give you the kind of sort of dictionary definition of it, is someone who provides guidance and assistance to inexperienced or would-be hams. So the question is, to elmer or not to elmer? And believe it or not, there are some times that you should not be the elmer for somebody. An elmer should provide guidance in areas that the newcomer is interested in. An effort needs to be made to find someone who's experienced in that area of interest. So I said, there are times when maybe you should not be that elmer. If you absolutely hate FT8, please don't be the elmer for that kid or that new ham who wants to learn how to do FT8. Find somebody who's into it, who knows how to do it, and who loves it, so they can share that passion with them. It's perfectly okay if you don't love it. That's what's great about amateur radio. We can all have different parts of the hobby that we like to do. Pass that person along to somebody else that can take it over. Trying to force newcomers into areas that they're not interested in is only going to distance them and make them run off. Okay. If any of you are in the room are CW ops and you're constantly trying to force kids to learn CW, there are kids who love to learn CW, but not all of them. Please don't try to force that kid to learn CW. And, you've got to send it 24 words a minute or you're not a real ham. And not all elmering has to be done in person. We have YouTube now. We have Zoom, obviously. This is a picture that you're looking at. That's actually my daughter, and she proposed to our old club in Mississippi she was talking to him about Parks on the Air, and none of them in the room had ever done a POTA activation. So she said, how about the next meeting, we just go do a POTA activation? So instead of meeting at the campus where we met in the Holly Springs National Forest, which was nearby, and set up to do a POTA activation. And one of the people brought his granddaughter, and that's the little girl with the red glow around her lips there, because that's the microphone light on there. They ended up running the POTA activation the whole time. My daughter at that time was a general class license, and she taught this little girl how to run a pileup, and they just owned it the whole night. They ran a pileup for hours. So, not all elmering has to be done by somebody that's older. Kids can elmer too. So don't discount what a kid has to offer, any elmer has to do based just on their age. Now, if you look at that middle picture, you're going to think, wow, that's some fine soldering work. I know. Kids are going to make mistakes and so go ahead and give them a way to do that. Let them use or experiment with tools they're going to use. What I did is, these are those FM radio kits that I showed you, the two kids dancing earlier. And the very first year I did these, all of them that didn't work, I kept in a bin. And so the next year, when I was teaching kids to solder and desolder, I took out those old kits so they could practice on that. And when they could show me they could actually solder and not create the mess that's in that middle picture. Then they would get their own kit. And if the kit worked, then they got to take it home. So keep those old parts. Be ready for the fact that they are going to mess stuff up and tear stuff up. They're going to waste solder. I had the head football coach's kid wasted an entire thing of solder because he figured out that he can just keep running it through that and it just makes a nice shiny ball. And you just kind of have to be okay with that sometimes. Tension is good. There's another quote, or kind of modified from one anyway. Engaging youth in anything is kind of like flying a kite. Kites require tension to stay afloat and to stay, actively flying. And youth are the same way. If they get bored, they're going to disappear. So keep the rigor and the challenge going to keep them engaged. And that's for any club member, if you think about it. Club sizes, at least here in the States, sometimes, a lot of places, they're dwindling. And that's because they're the exact same thing every single time. So things need to be shaken up and changed up a good bit from meeting to meeting so that people don't get bored, so that tension's always there. You want people to kind of anticipate and look forward to that next big thing. This is amateur radio, so create a culture for youth on the air. This one should be obvious, but it's not when you listen on the air a lot of times. Teach kids to use the equipment so that they can use for their license. Get them a taste of what comes later with an upgrade. And please, the biggest thing I have to say is when you hear a kid on the air, talk to them. I don't care if it's you're running a Parks on the Air activation or whatever. Take a minute and talk to them. And I actually heard, CQ Worldwide was when was that? A week ago. And I actually heard a station stop when a kid called. And I mean, it wasn't a long conversation, but they asked them their name and, what they were doing. And they took a minute or two out of their contest run to talk to a kid. And I thought that was cool. I wished I had my phone handy to record it, but I didn't. So, take a minute, talk to the kid because it'll make their day. Give them more than a 5973. And this is a contact that we had. So, the smile on his face when the guy was actually taking a minute to talk to him, that was actually a nice gentleman from West Virginia who stayed on the air for over an hour to make sure every kid in there got a chance to talk to him. So how do we reach them? Now, these flyers are samples of what I do here in the States. What you do over there will be a little bit different, but annually we host a Teachers Institute where I bring teachers in and I train them to teach amateur radio to kids, and I send them out with gear to help teach these things. I'm a firm believer that one of the best avenues to get youth is through schools and through teachers. So, be ready and willing to discuss amateur radio with teachers, administrators, school board members, whatever. Discuss what it offers and why it helps kids. Obviously, you can tell everybody about ARRL, even if it's not your organization. We'd love to have you. And then I have tools to help. And so, y'all are Australia, I'm in the States, but if you have questions on how to approach school administrators, shoot me an email. I'm more than happy to discuss it with you. We can hop on a Zoom call and figure out a way to help you get into schools. And these are just here in the States. We have scholarships for kids who are hams. I don't know if y'all can work on getting some. Maybe you have some. I don't know. But this last year, the ARRL Foundation just gave away over almost $1 million in college scholarships for kids. Follow up and support. After and this is just in general, when somebody gets their license, follow up with them, support. Don't just, hey, come to the next club meeting when they're leaving a testing site or whatever. Make the effort to give them a phone call and invite them back. The same thing, with teachers, give them a hand. Call them every now and then, especially if you're working with a school, because those people get really, really busy. And trust me, they'll appreciate it, even if all you're going to do is come help them program bow things. I'll skip through some of these because I know I'm running short on the time here. Offer to host kit builds for teachers and students if possible. Find donors to help with the cost. Like I said, I did it on YouTube. I happen to know a guy in Australia who's got a great YouTube channel, so maybe he can help you out with that. And then it's all about vision. A goal is not the same thing as a vision, because a goal has a set ending point, whereas a vision is how we see the future and how we hope to shape it. So focus on the vision. For me, the vision is kind of a culture of encouraging engagement in amateur radio with people of all ages. I don't have a specific goal of I have to get, 1,000 kids engaged. I have a vision of a culture instead. And then that brings us to this last slide with questions and answers. And you're going to have mic runners or whatever if you have any questions there. And I'll stop sharing so I can see you a little bit better.
Hey, g'day, Steve. John VK3ATV. There's a hesitation in Australia. I'm not sure whether you, sorry, can you hear me?
I got you. I was just putting the other ear in to make sure.
Yeah, okay. There's a hesitation in Australia because we've got something called working with children checks, and you can't actually engage with kids unless you've gone through that. It's a government approved certification that you can work with children. So there's probably a lot of hesitation if you don't have that to engage with groups of kids or encourage groups of kids. Do you have that kind of system over there, or how do you see us, other than everyone getting a working with children check? How would you see that that happen?
So, like I said, I tend to go with the teachers a lot of times. Now, you're right in that a lot of times schools, especially here, don't want just the random strangers showing up to their kids' classrooms. We don't have something here that keeps people from like having, churches here have youth groups and stuff all the time, and they don't all go through some special training. So that's different. So maybe trying to partner with a school or a teacher, and, because the teacher obviously has to have whatever, I forget the program name that you called it, but something to work with kids and then go from there. But yeah, that's, I'm all about child safety at the same time. So I get where they're coming from. So, if it's something you really want to do, then I don't know how complicated the process is to get that certification, but I can tell you after 60 kids getting licensed, it would be worth it for me.
Yeah. Hi, Steve. Just a quick question. That the slide you showed with the young gentleman crying after not getting his certificate. I'd be interested in your views on this. There's a little bit of a stereotype where we think that kids are less resilient these days than when we were young. I'd be curious to know whether, in your experience, that is actually the case. We have a kind of you can't fail kind of attitude towards things, or a stereotype, if you like, in our schools, etc. I'd be curious to know from your perspective, do you think kids are a little less resilient these days than they would have been in our day?
Yeah, I do. I think the system is making those kids less resilient. That gentleman that was crying, that was in 2006, and yeah, he cried, and he didn't end up getting his license after fact, but he didn't hesitate to get right back to studying. Whereas now, I think a lot of times kids are almost conditioned to, when they don't succeed at something, they're like, oh, well, forget it. I'm going to move to the next thing. They're used to, well, everybody gets a cookie, and I'm not a subscriber to that at all. You have to earn your cookie. Anybody who has any questions or wants to just Zoom and talk about how to, engage kids or schools, my email, Hayden's got it. It's just my call sign at ARRL.org, and I'm more than happy to help you out.